Captain Elias Blake sat in the vast chamber, the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. He was surrounded by representatives of the Galactic Council, the highest governing body in the galaxy. The air in the room felt thick with tension. Humanity had come a long way to this point, proving itself an essential part of the Galactic Alliance. But today, everything was about to change. Blake, a seasoned diplomat and military strategist, watched as the Council's leading members, alien species of all shapes and sizes, debated the future of the galaxy. The Council had long been known for its manipulation, its control over the galactic economy, and its imposition of rules that often favored the powerful at the expense of the weak. But now, they were pushing for something Blake could not accept. The Council's spokesman, an ancient and respected species known as the Zoltorians, stood up and made a final demand. Humanity will share its advanced technologies with the Galactic Council or face the consequences, he said, his voice cold and final. The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Blake's heart pounded in his chest. The Zoltorians were not known for their mercy, and their ultimatum was clear. If humanity refused, they would face severe sanctions. The request itself wasn't entirely unreasonable, but the arrogance behind it left Blake no choice. The Council had pushed too far this time. He stood up slowly, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the faces of the other species present. Some were sympathetic to humanity, but most were silent, unwilling to challenge the status quo. Blake knew this was a moment that would define humanity's future. He had to make a stand. "We will not be coerced," Blake said, his voice steady but firm. "Humanity will never bow to threats, not even from the Galactic Council. We have fought too hard to be free, and we will not let you take that from us." His words echoed through the chamber, a bold declaration that rippled across the room. Murmurs spread like wildfire, a mix of disbelief and shock. The Council had never been defied so openly before. The Zoltorian representative's eyes narrowed, his lips tightening into a thin line. "You will regret this, human," he warned, his voice carrying a threat. Blake didn't flinch. "I don't think so. But we are done negotiating under duress. We stand as equals, or not at all." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The other species of the Galactic Council exchanged glances, some shocked by Blake's defiance, others quietly admiring his bravery. But the message was clear: humanity would not yield. Blake turned and left the room without another word. As he exited the chamber, he could feel the eyes of the galaxy on him. This was no longer about politics. It was a declaration of independence. The Council had made a dangerous mistake, and now the galaxy would feel the consequences. The news of Captain Elias Blake's bold refusal to submit to the Galactic Council spread quickly across the galaxy. It didn't take long for the diplomatic corridors of every major species to buzz with whispers and gossip. Humanity, a species known for its resilience, had just sent shockwaves through the political heart of the galaxy. The Galactic Council, stunned by Blake's defiance, struggled to find its footing. In the Council's meeting hall, the once unified group now found itself divided. A Zoltorian elder, a towering figure with gray skin and sharp, calculating eyes, slammed his fist onto the table. "This insolence will not go unpunished," he thundered. His voice filled the chamber, causing the other representatives to shift uncomfortably. Some species, such as the peaceful Kori and the technologically advanced Frel, exchanged uneasy glances. They had always admired humanity's courage, but this was different. To openly defy the Council was something no one had dared to do before. "We cannot allow one species to defy the Council without consequence," the Zoltorian continued, his voice simmering with rage. "Humanity is out of control. We must act swiftly." However, not everyone in the room shared the Zoltorian sentiments. A female Hirith, a species known for their wisdom and calm demeanor, spoke up. "We must ask ourselves why humanity refused. Have we truly listened to their concerns, or are we simply blinded by our own power?" Her words caused a ripple of unease among the council members. Some began to rethink their positions, but the majority still favored punishment. Back on Earth, the mood was far from fearful. Captain Blake's words had struck a chord with the people. Humanity's independence had always been a point of pride, and Blake's refusal to bow to the Galactic Council sparked a surge of unity. The message from Earth's leaders was clear: we will not be bullied. Blake, now a symbol of defiance, stood before the people in a broadcast to the colonies. His face, stern and resolute, filled every screen. The Galactic Council believes they can force us into submission, but we will not yield. Our people fought for freedom, and we will not let anyone take that away from us. His words were met with a thunderous applause from millions of humans across the stars. As Blake spoke, a shift began to happen. People who had once been neutral, unsure of where humanity's place in the galaxy should be, now rallied behind his call for strength and self-determination. But the council wasn't done. The Zaltorians, along with a handful of other species who had long viewed humanity with suspicion, sent word to their allies across the galaxy. If humanity refused to negotiate, they would isolate Earth from the galactic trade routes, cut off their resources, and begin a campaign of economic sanctions. Blake knew these threats were serious. Yet, as the Council's threats mounted, so did humanity's resolve. The more they pushed, the stronger humanity became. They were no longer simply a small species in the grand scheme of the galaxy. They were a force to be reckoned with. But with each passing day, the divide between the Galactic Council and humanity grew wider. The consequences of Blake's defiance had only just begun to unfold. The Council had underestimated humanity's spirit, and they would soon learn the hard way that humanity was not to be easily intimidated. The Galactic Council was not known for its patience, and they wasted no time in retaliating against humanity's defiance. With Captain Elias Blake's refusal to comply still echoing through the galaxy, the Council decided it was time to send a message. They couldn't allow one species to challenge their authority, especially not humanity, whose rapid rise had long threatened the established order. The Council issued orders to strike a human colony on the edge of explored space. The colony, New Horizons, was a small settlement but a critical one, strategically located near a vital trade route. The attack was meant to cripple humanity's morale, to show that resistance came with a heavy price. The strike came without warning. A fleet of battle cruisers, led by the Zaltorian flagship, descended upon the colony like a storm. The first barrage of plasma weapons hit the colony's defense shields, shaking the entire settlement. Buildings collapsed, fires spread, and chaos erupted. The residents of New Horizons scrambled for shelter, but they were ill-prepared for the overwhelming force that now rained down upon them. On Earth, the news of the attack reached Captain Blake almost instantly. His face hardened as he watched the footage on his comm screen. People were dying, and the Council had made its first move. Humanity had been struck, but Blake's resolve remained unshaken. This was no longer a matter of diplomacy. This was war. Blake convened an emergency meeting with his military advisors. General Miranda Ruiz, a seasoned strategist, stood at the head of the table, her face grim. "They've made a grave mistake," she said, her voice steady. "The attack on New Horizons was meant to crush our spirit, but it will have the opposite effect. We can't afford to sit back and let this go unanswered." Blake nodded. The time for negotiation was over. The humans had tried diplomacy, but now they would fight back. "Prepare the fleet. We hit them hard and fast. If they want war, we'll give them one." The human fleet, though smaller than the Council's, was fierce and well-equipped. Humanity had learned quickly from their interactions with other species, and their military had grown stronger with each passing year. Blake knew that this was the moment to show the galaxy that humanity would not bow to anyone. The following days were a blur of strategy sessions, fleet deployments, and rallying humanity's allies. Blake's message to the human colonies was clear: we will not be intimidated. We will not surrender. We fight for our freedom. When the counterstrike was launched, The enemy never saw it coming. Blake's fleet attacked with precision and speed, catching the Zoltorian flagship off guard. The human ships, using advanced technology and creative tactics, maneuvered with surprising agility. For the first time, humanity's military prowess was on full display. In the chaos of the battle, Blake's flagship, the Resolute, led the charge. The Zoltorian cruisers were powerful, but they lacked the unpredictability of human tactics. The battle raged for hours, but as the dust settled, the human fleet stood victorious. The Zoltorian flagship, heavily damaged and retreating, left behind a clear message: humanity was not to be underestimated. As the news of the victory spread, Blake felt a mix of pride and concern. Humanity had proven its strength, but the war had only just begun. The Galactic Council would not take this defeat lightly. The real challenge was only starting, and the stakes were higher than ever. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Captain Elias Blake stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Resolute, staring out into the vastness of space. The human fleet had dealt a significant blow to the Galactic Council, but Blake knew that the Zoltorians and their allies would not give up so easily. The victory at New Horizons was only the beginning of something much larger. Back on Earth, the atmosphere was charged with a sense of determination. The news of their victory had spread across the colonies like wildfire, igniting a fierce pride among humanity. For the first time, the human race saw itself as more than just a small species on the edge of the galaxy. They were a force to be reckoned with. And they were not alone. Humanity's actions had caught the attention of other species who were tired of the Council's oppressive rule. The Free Union of Independent Species, FUIS, began to take shape, a coalition of races who had long been marginalized by the Galactic Council. They, too, had suffered under the Council's heavy hand. And now, they saw humanity as a symbol of hope. One of the first to join the new alliance was the Verkeri, a race of nomadic traders known for their cunning and resourcefulness. The Verkeri had always been neutral in galactic politics, preferring to stay out of conflicts. But now, they had seen enough. Their fleet, though small, was known for its stealth capabilities, making them an invaluable asset to the Free Union. Another unexpected ally came from the Drakh, a fierce warrior race whose reputation for combat prowess was legendary. For years, the Drakh had kept to themselves, unwilling to be drawn into galactic disputes. But the Zoltorians' attack on the human colonies had pushed them over the edge. They sent a message to Blake: "We fight with you." The Drakh's arrival in the Free Union was a game-changer. Their military might added a new dimension to humanity's growing resistance. Blake knew that with the Verkeri's stealth and the Drakh's strength, they had a real chance at taking the fight to the Council. As the Free Union gained strength, Blake held a secret meeting with the leaders of the new coalition aboard the Resolute. He stood before them, his expression serious. "We are united not by a single race, but by a common cause. The Council has pushed too far. It's time we show them that we will not be ruled." The representatives of the Verkeri and Drakh nodded in agreement. Blake had earned their respect, and in return, they had pledged their fleets to the fight. The Council had no idea what was coming. From here on, Blake continued, "We fight together as one. We may be different species, but our goal is the same: freedom and the right to determine our own future." The meeting ended with a renewed sense of purpose. As the leaders dispersed, Blake felt a quiet confidence he hadn't experienced before. Humanity was no longer alone in this struggle. They had allies, real allies, who would stand by their side. But even as the Free Union grew stronger, Blake knew the Council would not back down. The Zoltorians and their allies would retaliate with even more force. The coming battle would be their greatest test yet. Humanity had united with other species, but now they would have to prove their strength in the face of an all-out war. The news of humanity's growing alliance spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The Free Union of Independent Species, FUIS, was no longer a small collection of rebel races. It had become a formidable force that the Galactic Council could no longer ignore. The Zoltorians, once the unquestioned leaders of the Council, found themselves struggling to maintain control. The cracks in the once solid foundation of the Galactic Council were beginning to show. In the Council's central chamber, the atmosphere was tense. The representatives of the various species, who had once been united in their dominance over the galaxy, now found themselves at odds with each other. The Zoltorians, still reeling from their defeat at New Horizons, were desperate to put an end to the growing resistance. But not all Council members were on the same page. "You see what's happening, don't you?" A Freelian ambassador, a creature of shimmering blue scales, spoke up, his voice laced with concern. "Humanity has formed an alliance. They're bringing others into their fold. If we don't act soon, we could lose everything." The Zoltorian elder at the head of the table, his sharp, angular face a mask of frustration, slammed his fist down onto the table. "We must strike before the Free Union becomes too powerful. They've humiliated us once, and they'll do it again if we don't crush them now." "But at what cost?" the Freelian countered. "We've already underestimated humanity once. Do we really want to make the same mistake again? They've already shown they can defeat us in battle. Perhaps it's time we consider negotiation instead of war." The room fell into silence. The Zoltorian's eyes narrowed, his anger clear. Negotiation. With them. After they openly defied the authority of the Galactic Council. His voice rose in fury. "If we back down now, we will be seen as weak. We cannot allow that." On the other side of the table, the representatives of the Zerni, a species known for their logical minds and peacekeeping history, exchanged glances. "Perhaps a compromise is the answer," one of them suggested. "Humanity values its independence. We cannot simply ignore that. Maybe we should offer them a new deal, one that respects their sovereignty while still maintaining the Council's influence." The Zoltorian elder stood up, his face twisted with disdain. "You fools. You would offer them a deal. A species that thinks it can defy the very foundation of our power. You'll regret this." But it was clear that the tides were shifting. The once absolute authority of the Galactic Council was faltering. The mere idea of negotiation with humanity, once unthinkable, was now being discussed openly. The Zoltorians, despite their power, were starting to lose their grip on the situation. Meanwhile, on Earth, Blake and his advisors watched closely. They knew the Council was in turmoil, and they were ready to take advantage of it. The growing sense of division within the Galactic Council gave Blake hope. Perhaps this was the opening humanity needed to tip the balance of power in their favor. "This is it," Blake said to General Miranda Ruiz as they reviewed the latest intelligence. "The Council is weakening. We can push forward, but we must strike decisively. If we wait too long, they'll regroup and come back stronger." Ruiz nodded, her eyes focused. "We've got the momentum. We need to keep it." Blake's hand tightened around the edge of the table. "Then let's give them something they won't forget." Captain Elias Blake paced back and forth in the command center of the Resolute, his mind racing. The Zoltorians had underestimated humanity, and now the tides of war were shifting. The Galactic Council was on the brink of collapse, and Blake could feel the growing pressure. But despite the challenges, there was something else at play. Something that was becoming humanity's greatest strength in this fight. It wasn't just their technological advances or their growing alliances. It was their ingenuity. Humans had always found creative solutions to problems, often when things seemed impossible. And in this galactic war, it was no different. Each victory, each strike, was a testament to humanity's ability to adapt, improvise, and overcome. Blake glanced over the latest battle reports. The Free Union was making significant strides, but it wasn't just about winning battles anymore. Humanity had begun to push the boundaries of what was possible in war. They were taking risks that no other species would dare, and it was working. General Miranda Ruiz stood beside him, reviewing the same data. "Captain, we've learned more from the Council's tactics in the past few weeks than in the last decade. We're getting smarter with every engagement." Blake nodded, his mind still processing the latest developments. The battle at the Zoltorian space station had been a turning point. The human fleet had used its advanced AI-driven drones to infiltrate the station's security systems, something that the Council's defenses hadn't been prepared for. It was a bold move, one that left the enemy scrambling. And it wasn't just technology. Human creativity had been key. The Zoltorians had relied on brute force and precision, but humanity had turned their own strengths against them. "We need more of that," Blake said, his voice firm. "It's not just about fighting harder, it's about fighting smarter." As the battle strategy evolved, so too did the confidence of the Free Union. The Verkari, known for their stealth and cunning, had begun sending strike teams to sabotage key Council infrastructure. The Drak, who had initially joined for their love of combat, were now finding ways to use their brute strength in innovative ways, turning the tide of battles that would have otherwise been lost. But the real game changer was humanity's ability to form alliances. The Free Union was no longer just a collection of independent species. It had become a united front, a force that was no longer simply reacting to the Council's aggression, but proactively taking the fight to them. Each species brought its own strengths, but it was humanity's leadership, its resilience, and its ingenuity that bound them together. Blake stood before his command staff, his voice steady as he addressed them. "We are more than a fleet of ships and weapons. We are a force driven by a vision. We fight for freedom, not just for ourselves, but for every species that has suffered under the Council's rule. Our strength lies not just in our firepower, but in our will." There was a pause in the room as everyone absorbed his words. Blake could see the determination in their eyes. They were no longer just soldiers in a war. They were fighters for a cause greater than themselves. As Blake looked out at the stars through the viewport, he knew that humanity's ingenuity and creativity would be the key to their victory. The Galactic Council had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated the human spirit. And now, humanity was about to show the galaxy just how far that spirit could go. The galaxy was changing, and Captain Elias Blake could feel it in the air. The momentum that humanity had gathered in the fight against the Galactic Council was undeniable. But Blake knew that this was the critical moment, the tipping point. The next step would determine the outcome of the war. The Council, though weakened, still held great power. Their response to humanity's victories would define the course of the conflict. The Free Union had grown stronger with each passing day. The Verkari sabotage missions were crippling the Council's infrastructure. The Drak's warriors, once seen as mercenaries, had become key players, turning battles with their sheer force. And humanity. Humanity had become the backbone of this resistance, with their tactics and determination leading the charge. Blake stood in front of a holographic map in the command center of the Resolute, his mind focused. The latest intelligence reports showed that the Zoltorians were preparing a massive retaliatory strike, one that could decimate the Free Union if they weren't careful. But there was something more troubling. A small, encrypted message had been intercepted. It was from an ally within the Council. The contents shocked Blake. "They're planning something big," Blake said, his voice low. "A surprise attack. The Zoltorians are pulling in their most powerful fleet. If we don't act now, we risk everything." General Miranda Ruiz stood beside him, her expression grim. "We've known they would retaliate. The question is, how do we counter their strength?" Blake didn't answer immediately. He was deep in thought, calculating the risks. The Council had underestimated humanity before. But now, their desperation made them dangerous. Blake knew that the Free Union had the advantage in numbers and tactics, but it wasn't enough to defeat the Zoltorians head-on. They would need to act fast, strike hard, and use their strengths, human ingenuity and adaptability, to outsmart the enemy. "Prepare the fleet," Blake finally said. "We move in 3 hours." The plan was simple but risky. The Free Union would launch a diversionary attack on one of the Zoltorians' outer defenses, drawing their fleet into a trap. Meanwhile, a small strike force, led by Commander Ivy Darrow, would infiltrate the Zoltorian command ship and disable their weapons systems. It was a dangerous mission, but it was the only way to level the playing field. As the fleet prepared for the mission, Blake stood alone on the bridge, his eyes locked on the stars. He knew that this battle would either bring victory or doom. The stakes couldn't be higher. The Free Union had already proven that they were a force to be reckoned with, but the real challenge was now. Hours later, the fleet moved into position. Blake's heart raced as the Resolute joined the other ships, forming the vanguard of the attack. The Zoltorian fleet was larger, but it was scattered. Blake's strategy relied on the element of surprise and humanity's unique ability to outthink their enemies. As the battle began, Blake watched from the command deck as the diversionary forces engaged the enemy. The Zoltorian fleet took the bait, pursuing the Free Union ships into a carefully planned trap. Just as Blake had hoped, their lines were broken. The strike force, including Darrow's team, slipped behind enemy lines. For the first time in the war, the Free Union had the upper hand. Blake's lips curled into a faint smile. It was working, but he knew it wasn't over yet. The Council still had plenty of power left. If they were going to win, they had to press their advantage, and they had to do it now. The battle raged on, the sound of explosions and the flashes of weapons lighting up the void of space. Captain Elias Blake stood at the command center of the Resolute, his hands gripping the edge of the control table. The plan had worked so far. The Zoltorian fleet had fallen into the trap, and the strike team led by Commander Ivy Darrow had successfully infiltrated the Zoltorian flagship. But the real test was still ahead. The Zoltorians were regrouping, and Blake knew they would strike back with everything they had. This was the moment that could decide the fate of humanity and the Free Union. If they won this battle, they could secure their place in the galaxy. If they lost, everything would be lost. The stakes had never been higher. Captain, the Zoltorians are preparing their final counterattack. General Miranda Ruiz reported, her voice steady despite the tension. They've brought in their reserve fleet. We're going to be outnumbered. Blake's gaze never left the view screen, where the Zoltorian ships were beginning to align, forming a massive formation. It was clear that they were preparing for a decisive strike. The Free Union's fleet was strong, but the Council's forces were overwhelming. We can't let them get the upper hand, Blake said, his voice calm but filled with determination. We know their tactics. Use the drones. Hit them from the sides. The Free Union fleet began to shift positions, their ships splitting into smaller groups to avoid being trapped by the Zoltorian assault. Blake knew that the key to winning was keeping the Zoltorians guessing. With the element of surprise, humanity and its allies could still have a fighting chance. In the heart of the Zoltorian flagship, Commander Ivy Darrow and her team fought their way through the ship's corridors. The battle had been fierce, but they were almost there. They had to disable the weapon systems before it was too late. Darrow's heart raced as she pushed forward, knowing that every second mattered. We're close, she radioed back to Blake. Once we take down their weapons, they'll be vulnerable. Blake nodded to himself as he gave the order for the next phase of the attack. The Free Union ships, including the Resolute, launched a series of missiles aimed directly at the Zoltorian flagship's energy core. The battle grew more chaotic as the missiles neared their target, but Blake knew the key moment was coming. On the flagship, Darrow and her team reached the control room. The Zoltorian defense forces were fierce, but they were outnumbered. With a final push, Darrow and her team disabled the weapons systems, plunging the Zoltorian ship into chaos. We did it. Darrow's voice came through the comms, filled with relief. They're defenseless now. Blake's heart skipped a beat as the news came through. This was it. The Zoltorian fleet was now exposed. The Free Union ships, led by humanity's forces, pressed their advantage. With no weapons to defend themselves, the Zoltorians were forced to retreat. As Blake watched the final moments of the battle unfold, he couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. The Galactic Council, once the all-powerful force that ruled over the galaxy, was now on the brink of defeat. Humanity, along with their allies, had fought with everything they had. They had shown the galaxy that they would not be ruled, and that the spirit of resistance was stronger than any force the Council could throw at them. The battle was over, but the war had changed the galaxy forever. Humanity had earned its place among the stars, not by bowing to the Council's demands, but by fighting for their freedom. The galaxy would never be the same. Blake took a deep breath, staring out at the stars. "We did it," he whispered to himself. "We won." The final battle was over, and the once mighty Galactic Council was in ruins. The Zaltorians, their flagship crippled and their forces retreating, had been forced to accept the undeniable truth. Humanity and its allies would no longer be subjugated. The Free Union's victory sent shockwaves across the galaxy, changing the power dynamics forever. Captain Elias Blake stood on the bridge of the Resolute, his eyes scanning the now quiet expanse of space. The battle had been won, but the victory had come at a cost. Many lives had been lost, and the war had left scars across the galaxy. Yet Blake couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. Humanity had stood up to the most powerful force in the galaxy and had come out on top. General Miranda Ruiz stepped up beside him, her face filled with both pride and weariness. "We did it, Captain," she said softly. "The Council is finished." "But what now?" Blake looked at her, his expression serious. "Now we rebuild. Now we make sure this victory means something." The Galactic Council had once controlled nearly every corner of the galaxy, dictating terms to those who were weaker or less united. But now, after the human-led resistance had shattered their influence, Blake knew the Council would not just fall quietly. The Council's leaders, those who had survived the battle, would regroup, but they were no longer invincible. The Free Union had already begun to fill the power vacuum left behind. It was a new era, one where species could choose their own path, free from the oppressive rule of the Council. As the dust settled, messages of peace and cooperation began to spread throughout the galaxy. Species who had once been at odds with humanity were now reaching out, offering their support, or at the very least their neutrality. Humanity had proved itself, and now the rest of the galaxy had to reckon with the fact that humans had earned their place among the stars. Back on Earth, celebrations erupted across the colonies. The news of the victory was broadcast on every screen, and humans, who had once been seen as just another species in a galaxy of countless others, were now the champions of freedom. Blake's name was spoken with reverence, but he knew that the war wasn't about him. It was about something bigger, the fight for the right to live freely. The Zaltorians, once arrogant and unyielding, were forced to concede. Their power was broken, and the remaining members of the Galactic Council were divided. No longer able to hold on to their position of authority, they had no choice but to step down. As their influence crumbled, the Free Union took charge, leading efforts to rebuild what had been torn apart. The new galactic system was born, a system built on mutual respect, cooperation, and equality. Humanity had been the spark, but it had ignited something much larger. A galaxy that would no longer tolerate tyranny. Captain Blake was offered a position of leadership in the new Galactic Council, but he declined. "I didn't fight for power," he told the other leaders. "I fought for freedom." And now, it's time for everyone to have a voice. As Blake and his team stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the stars outside, the weight of the galaxy's future hung in the air. The Council had fallen, but a new chapter had begun. Humanity had shown the galaxy what it meant to fight for what was right, and the stars, once distant and cold, now seemed a little closer. The galaxy had changed. Captain Elias Blake stood in the center of the Resolute's command deck, gazing out into the vast expanse of stars. The battle was over, but what followed was something far more important, a new beginning. The Galactic Council had been toppled, its power shattered by humanity and its allies. Now, it was time for the galaxy to rebuild not just its systems, but its soul. The war had been brutal, and Blake knew there was no going back to how things were. The Council's control had cast a long shadow over countless species. For centuries, the galaxy had been divided, ruled by those who thought themselves above the rest. But now, that was all changing. "Captain, the representatives from the Free Union are waiting for you in the conference room." General Miranda Ruiz's voice broke through his thoughts. Blake nodded and turned toward her. "Let's not keep them waiting." The conference room buzzed with energy as Blake entered, his presence commanding attention. Leaders from across the galaxy, species who had once lived in the shadow of the Council, were now united under a common cause. The walls of the room displayed holographic images of the Free Union's new emblem, a symbol of hope, strength, and unity. Blake felt the weight of the moment, but there was something different now. The fear, the uncertainty, was gone. Humanity had proven itself, and now it was up to them to guide the future. Blake took his seat at the head of the table, his eyes meeting those of the species who had fought alongside him. There was a calm confidence in the room now, as the leaders of the Free Union began to speak. "We owe this victory to you, Blake," said Tanar, the leader of the Verkeri, his long, slender form leaning slightly forward. "Humanity's leadership inspired us all. You showed us how to stand together." Blake shook his head. "This victory wasn't just mine. It was ours. Humanity may have led the charge, but it was your species' bravery, your willingness to fight for a future, that made this possible." A quiet murmur of agreement passed through the room. Blake could see the respect they had for one another. The war had changed them, but it had also brought them together. The Drakh leader, Gorak, stood next, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the table. "The Zaltorians and their allies underestimated you, Blake. They thought humanity would break under pressure, but you proved them wrong. You've earned more than just victory. You've earned a future." Blake smiled, but his mind was already moving ahead. The fight was over, but now came the real work, rebuilding the galaxy and ensuring that it would never again fall into the hands of a single oppressive force. He turned to the rest of the Council, his voice steady. "The battle we fought was just the beginning. Now we must build a new galaxy, one where every species has a voice, where no one is oppressed, and where peace isn't a dream, but a reality." The room went silent for a moment. The weight of Blake's words sank in. It was a new era, and the Free Union was ready to lead the galaxy into it. There would be challenges ahead, old wounds to heal, old hatreds to put aside. But Blake knew that humanity, and its allies, had the will to face them. As the meeting began, Blake felt a quiet pride. The fight for freedom had been long and hard, but the future was now in their hands. The galaxy was no longer just a place of conflict. It was a place of hope. And humanity had been the spark that lit the fire. Looking out at the stars again, Blake couldn't help but feel that the universe was finally theirs to shape.